In business today, 3 things to know. First, primary day in the U.S. for congressional seats. Why business groups are dueling with the Tea Party, hoping to defeat them and save mainstream Republicans. Then, a retail mess. Major stores report earnings that have fallen off the rack. And marketing that is no longer by the book. How authors are drumming up business through some radical means. Arise Exchange starts now. Hello, everyone. I'm Andrew Schmertz. Primary day in the U.S., where 6 states will be nominating candidates for Congress. And once again, it is a showdown between the anti-establishment Tea Party and high-profile Republican incumbents. Key states to watch: Kentucky, where Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell is challenged by Tea Party favorite Matt Bevin. In Idaho, where 8-term Congressman Mike Simpson faces a tough primary. And races in Oregon and Georgia are also pitting traditional Republicans against Tea Party upstarts. This year, big business is throwing its money behind mainstream Republicans, concerned that Tea Party candidates are unelectable in the general election in November and threaten the Republican chances of a Senate takeover. We have 2 interviews. First, our D.C. Bureau Chief James Blow in Washington with what is at stake. Good afternoon to you, James.
Hi there, Andrew. Basically, what is at stake is control of the U.S. Senate. And what the business community is trying to do is to sort of make sure that Republicans gain control of the Senate. Currently, the Democrats have control. And so they are supporting sort of mainstream candidates, people who are sort of much more in line with sort of traditional business Republicans. At the same time, what has happened is the traditional Republicans have become slightly more conservative as a result of the Tea Party challenges. And so this is all a reaction to the Tea Party victors who won in 2012 and who then were not able to win the general election when they were up against very strong Democrats.
And the Tea Party also represents, and we're going to talk more about this with our next guest, but also represents some anti-business initiatives, specifically on things like immigration and, of course, the government shutdown.
Right. The Tea Party has been very opposed to any immigration policy or changes, and they were very supportive of the shutdown. This obviously are 2 things that the U.S. Chamber wants and that businesses around the country want, and it's more in line with sort of the moderate Republicanism that has proven victorious in the past.
If the mainstream Republicans, and if we want to call Mitch McConnell mainstream, if they win, what does the Republican prospects then look for a Senate takeover?
Well, look, I think the idea is that the Republicans are much more likely to take the Senate. You have North Carolina. Nebraska just had a primary last week. A Republican won. He's likely going to win the Senate there. They only need 6 seats. It looks like you're going to get a Republican potentially in Arkansas, in Louisiana, possibly in Michigan. The field is certainly slighted and weighted toward Republican takeover, and that's likely to happen. Okay, James Blow in Washington, D.C., thank you. Hadley Heath now joins us by phone. She is a senior policy analyst with the Independent Women's Forum, a conservative-leaning group. Hadley, welcome back to Arise Exchange.
Thank you for having me.
So what is going on here with business groups? They basically, it seems like, sat out the last election, got surprised by the Tea Party's maybe strong showing, and now they're pretty much looking to throw the Tea Party candidates under the bus.
That's right. And what you'll hear from business groups, they'll say they don't want candidates up for the general election who are untested or who lack experience in politics. But on the other hand, especially among conservative voters, the appeal of the citizen legislator, someone who is not a lifelong politician, is actually greater among voters on the Republican side. So during primary season, we will see a lot of talk about whether or not the candidates are lifelong politicians or whether or not they have more experience in other sectors, like the private sector, which appeals to some Republican voters who believe that means they'll represent the interests of the people more accurately.
But for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, for example, how much of this actually comes down to policy? Because a lot of the politics and policy that the Tea Party candidates support does not align itself with businesses.
Well, we will see some differences among Republican candidates in certain issue areas during primary season. But remember, after the primary season is over, these candidates will be facing a Democratic candidate in the general, and that's when the focus will shift probably to some issues where the Chamber of Commerce and conservative voters of all stripes agree more. For example, the health reform law and whether or not we want to continue to implement what conservatives call Obamacare, or whether we want to see some changes in other issue areas where Republicans of all stripes can see in more eye to eye. But we will see during primary season, you're right, you mentioned in your last interview the issue of immigration. That is one where the Chamber of Commerce and some Tea Party conservatives do not agree. So this is the time during primary season really to discuss those issues among conservative and Republican voters, which candidates they want, which candidates represent the majority of those voters.
What are some of the tactics the Chamber of Commerce and other big businesses are doing here to try to derail some of these candidacies?
Well, there's a limit to how much organizations and people, individuals can donate directly to political campaigns. So oftentimes what organizations will do when they want to be involved in a political race is they will do an education or issue-focused campaign. They may do an independent expenditure in the campaign to let voters know about the voting records and the statements that various candidates have made, but there's a limit to how much they can actually do financially for the specific candidate's campaign. So what we'll see is more issue-focused campaigns. You may see pamphlets or commercials that are focused on a specific candidate, comparing maybe more than one candidate on an issue area, but the focus of that material will be educational and policy issue-focused.
Is there a worry here that they could seize defeat from the jaws of victory, basically because the Republicans, the momentum, according to the polls, are all pointing towards a Republican takeover in the Senate, but it's the Republican Party itself which could get in the way?
Well, there is certainly a lot of dissatisfaction among voters, Democrats, independents, and Republicans with the current state of Congress, with the current White House. So there's generally an anti-incumbent feeling, which means if business groups or other large organizations on the right or left choose to endorse or support candidates who are incumbents, who do have that name recognition, do have that political experience, then they do have to face the political headwind of a populace that is basically dissatisfied and upset with anyone who's in Washington, D.C. right now.
And
so
Hadley,
that, of course, is the risk they run.
Hadley, one final business-oriented question. Is there a divide between the big business and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and smaller businesses in their view of the Tea Party?
I believe so. I think that, there's people all across the board when you talk about conservatism on the right-hand side of politics in the United States. There are people who are more moderate. There are people who are small business owners who often fall on the right-hand side of politics. And regulations sometimes, and taxes and subsidies sometimes, when government gets involved with big businesses, those benefit the larger companies who can deal with more administrative costs, whereas they tend to stomp out or stifle competition from the little guy.
We certainly see that.
That's why free market policies are more favored by small business.
We certainly see that in the issue of regulations. Hadley, Heath from the Independent Women's Forum, thank you as always.
Thank you.
The markets skidded today following tough earnings reports from retailers. We're going to have more on that in a moment. But first, let's take a look at the closing numbers. It was the first down day for Wall Street in 3 sessions. The Dow Jones Industrial Average sliding triple digits to 137.55, down 137.55 points to 16,374. The S&P 500 down 12 1/4, and the NASDAQ off 28.92. Taking a look at some of our top stocks we're watching today. Boeing surpassed 2,000 orders for its next-gen single-aisle 737 MAX this week. Boeing says this is a record time for the company for new aircraft purchases. The company also said on Tuesday that it is on track to begin final assembly of the jet in mid-2015. Boeing closing down $1.77. Microsoft unveiled a larger but slightly lighter version of its Surface Pro tablet today. The Surface launched in October 2012, which nobody bought. Has about 2% of the tablet market share. Microsoft closing down 7 cents. And restaurant chain Chipotle says guns are not welcome with its burritos. This in response to an uproar on social media after gun rights activists openly displayed their assault rifles inside one of its restaurants in Dallas this past weekend. Chipotle down 5.5 to $495.65. Gold closing up 80 cents and oil pulling back 17 cents. So where did the shoppers go? Because they did not shop last quarter. Earnings news from major retailers disappointed across the board. Here is a short list. Staples reported a 43% drop in profit. TJX, the parent company of TJ Maxx, reported earnings 4.5% below consensus. Dick's Sporting Goods, its stock getting hammered today, reporting an increase in profits but missed by a wide margin on estimates thanks to weakness in golf and hunting sales, according to the company. And Urban Outfitters reporting a decline in earnings. Shares of all these companies tumbling Tuesday. Howard Rosencrans is Chief Research Analyst with Value Advisory. First time here on Rise Exchange. Thank you, Howard, for coming over.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start with retailers here. What exactly happened?
Weather was a major factor in the first quarter, probably continued to be through much of April. I don't necessarily view it as a barometer of how these companies are going to do forward or what the retail environment is. I mean, there are certainly going to be guys like Staples, who have a bricks and mortar model that is going to continue to be extremely challenged. If you look at Urban Outfitters, they have some specific issues relative to their core brand. Home Depot is not one that's going to be as much exposed to home improvement.
And Home Depot did pretty well, and I want to ask you about that in a moment. With the weather excuse, if you will, that we keep hearing about. But analysts should have known that, and I know analysts always either overestimate or underestimate. You know, they're kind of all over on this. The question is how much of this was a weather excuse? How much of this is potential softness in the economy?
I think it's largely, if you talk about retail broadly, it is predominantly weather, and I'm going to give all of the companies, for all intents and purposes, a pass.
And it's true.
There happens to be some business that migrates out to the net. So guys like Staples are going to get squeezed on that. So you are losing brick and mortar to internet sales, and that's going to hurt profitability.
Why did Dick's Sporting Goods get so hammered by the market today when it did report at least an increase in earnings, but a concern over golfing and hunting, it seems?
Well, I mean, those businesses, if you look at anything in the gun-related world, you had basically these incidents throughout the country on, it wasn't, quote, hunting related, but you had an avalanche of people who started to order guns in anticipation of a change in legislation. They bought more hunting guns and they bought more rifles. So you sort of had, you took away you pulled forward from demand.
Okay, Home Depot did perform pretty well. And I imagine this is a situation where the weather will help a Home Depot and maybe help a Lowe's because there's got to be some rebuilding that's going on and there's going to be pent-up demand in this quarter.
Well, that's absolutely true, but I think a bigger trend is certainly going to be, I'm a big bull on housing.
Okay, well, there you go.
Housing has been underwhelming to date. There's no question about it. I mean, you went through the depths, and we had a little lift. I think you're going to get a pronounced lift off now. I think a lot of the pressures that the regulators are now, all of a sudden, instead of the regulators being tougher on the banks, all of a sudden they're allowing the banks to loosen up.
Well, they are loosening up. They announced that they're going to be changing its mortgages standards again.
Yeah, the Fannie, the Freddie, exactly.
Right.
So they're going to they're going back to the old cycle, saying just throw money at them.
What's old is new again. Let's talk about the markets a little bit. We've had a little bit of a pullback, some triple-digit losses today. Are we headed for correction territory?
Well, we're actually in a correction already. If you look at the broad averages, if you look at the S&P and you look at the Dow,
about 10%.
You're pretty much at all-time highs. However, if you look at the Russell and the Nasdaq, and forget Nasdaq 5,000 15 years ago, but if you look at them vis-a-vis their 52-week highs, you're down about 10%, actually exceeding 10%. On the R2K, on the Russell 2000. And if you look at individual stocks, the Russell and Nasdaq, the average stock is actually down 20% from its highs.
Well, the Russell specifically getting hit in the small cap area. And the
Russell
question,
is the small cap.
Right, exactly. So the question is are we looking at a prolonged correction here, or are we going to look into something like a bear market?
I think we're going to have a correction. When you say prolonged, I would suggest, first of all, you have to describe the magnitude. I don't think we're going to hit, quote, 20 and get to a bear market per se, at least as defined by the major averages. But you've had a huge dichotomy between the averages holding up and the smaller you get coming down and getting hit more. So I think the averages have to come down and the smalls probably continue to get hit.
Okay. Howard Rosencrans with Value Advisory. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it. Coming up, the anniversary of a devastating tornado in Oklahoma, the recovery effort, and how one community of people may be missing out on early warnings here on a Rise Exchange.
I think that people in America do care about what happens throughout the world.
Global warming is probably something that has to be addressed sooner rather than later.
Somalia and the genocide there, and that's something people don't know about. They have no idea the brevity of that situation.
The first thing I think about when I think of Africa is like war and famine and disease.
And right now with the tsunami that happened or the earthquakes in, Japan, we always look out for other people.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
It's the one-year anniversary of devastating tornadoes near Oklahoma City that killed 24 people and leveled Moore, Oklahoma. That recovery is ongoing, with new worries that some in tornado-prone areas are underserved by early warning systems. Specifically, the lack of Hispanic media means many are not getting timely messages about deadly storms. Oklahoma City Mayor Mick Cornett joins us now on the phone. Mr. Mayor, welcome back to Arise Exchange.
Good afternoon. Good to be with you.
Let's just start with an update on the recovery. What does the area look like now 1 year later?
I would say about half of it is rebuilt. You have some homeowners who've decided to move on and didn't want to rebuild, but most are rebuilding, and they've resolved their individual insurance issues and have rebuilt, and the neighborhoods and the infrastructure are back intact.
How was the insurance issues resolved, by the way? Was that a concern?
No, I think in this situation, and especially because there's so much attention on the insurance companies themselves, they bend over backwards to be helpful. So, no, we haven't heard of any significant issues in that regard.
And do you feel that the infrastructure for a warning system is improving? It's always very challenging. We understand that no one can specifically predict tornadoes.
Yeah, well, I think the science is certainly improving. And having grown up in Oklahoma and kind of been accustomed to TV meteorology in general. The science, they're able to predict it and which direction it's heading and what time it may arrive in your area. So, these things are still, quite rare. I mean, I've still never even seen a tornado in my life, and I've lived here my whole life. But, and we've gone 10 years, prior to last year's tornado without really any significant outbreak. And we haven't had anything this year, but boy, we got hit last year with 2 in that 2-week period.
You certainly did.
But I would say that the warning systems are all there, and in general, when it's a significant weather day like it was on that day a year ago, we had some advance warnings that people should be taking precautions and be on the lookout. And so an hour out, you certainly knew that there was a high likelihood that one was going to hit somewhere, and people were generally aware.
There was a story.
What was unusual about that one still was that it came early in the day when kids were still at school, and I think that still is is both puzzling, confusing, and extremely disappointing to us. We've never in our city's history had a tornado like that hit during the daytime.
Yeah, that's true. These are usually late afternoon storms, right? As the thunder and the heat kind of gives rise to the weather. There's a story on NPR today about the Latino community in Oklahoma, and specifically that there's not a huge Hispanic media outreach, and therefore they say that a big chunk of community that does not speak the language may be missing out on key warnings. Where do you come down on that?
Well, I've not heard those specific suggestions. What I would say is there is a lot of Spanish media. There is both television and radio and newspaper media here that is leaning toward the Hispanic population. But most of the technology, expense goes to the main, network affiliate stations. Mm-hmm. And so they're the ones with the best weather coverage, the best technology, the helicopters and things like that are get up and giving the best information. The Hispanic media typically have smaller budgets and probably fewer resources. So it probably isn't a level playing field, but to characterize it as there not being any Spanish media would be incorrect.
Okay, and the Hispanic population is among one of the fastest growing in Oklahoma, isn't it?
It is. It's probably 10 to 12% of our city's population.
Are you comfortable when someone calls 911 that there are Spanish-speaking operators? There was a story in Tennessee where there's some gaps there, but in Oklahoma and Oklahoma City, can you address that? If someone just speaks Spanish and calls 911, is there someone there who can understand them?
Yeah, we work on that, pretty hard, and it's especially when we go through our police recruiting classes. You get special opportunities to rise to the top of the class if you're bilingual. And and that's a significant problem with police responding to emergencies. They arrive on the scene, they've got to figure out what's happened, and if there's a language issue, it can be really tough to determine the facts. And so it's something that we're continually trying to address. And I'm not going to tell you that we've got that part of it mastered, but having so many Spanish-speaking people in your community does cause concerns in all sorts of public safety areas.
Mr. Mayor, thank you for your time today. I know you've had a busy day because on this one-year anniversary, Mick, Cornett, I appreciate it.
You bet.
Okay. Time now for our business ticker stories making news around the world. General Motors announces yet another recall. It involves more than 2.4 million cars and trucks in 4 separate U.S. recalls. They include the Buick Enclave, Chevy Traverse, and GMC Acadia, and the Saturn Outlook involving a seatbelt defect. The automaker also recalling previous generation Chevy Malibus and Pontiac G6s because of a shift cable that could wear out over time. And some models of the Cadillac Escalade, the Chevy Silverado, and the GMC Sierra pickups are also being recalled for various reasons. The latest recall pushes the vehicles that GM has recalled this year to more than 15 million worldwide. GoPro is going public. The action camera maker revealing plans to raise up to $100 million in an initial public offering. Its filings show the company raked in $986 million in revenue last year, up 87% from the year before. Company plans to trade on the NASDAQ under the symbol GPRO. And McDonald's and Burger King are shaking things up in an effort to turn around sagging businesses. Burger King has decided to scrap its 40-year-old "Have it your way" slogan in favor of the more personal "Be your way," whatever "Be your way" means. Meanwhile, later this summer, McDonald's will roll out a yogurt option for its Happy Meals to promote healthier eating. It's also introducing a new Happy Meal mascot. Take a look at this. That may end up terrifying your kids. The new character that's supposed to bring fun and excitement to kids' meals has instead been getting battered on social media, with some describing it as disturbing and creepy. Looks like one of those guys you may see hanging around the school children park. Ahead, one college student did so her parents wouldn't find out she never went to class. Makes her our favorite person of the day. You're watching Arise Exchange.
I think news does make people put things in black and white terms, just so that they have a dividing line between what their viewers like and dislike.
When they see a person of color, they either think that they're not going to do anything, they're either on drugs, or they got pregnant at an early age. And I just want to say that that's not true.
It tends to reflect more the interests of the upper income people and the upper income interests.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
Time now for our favorite person of the day, when we pick one person who grabbed our attention and not for the right reasons. Today, it is a 22-year-old woman who needed to find a way out of a college graduation ceremony because she skipped classes and wasted all her parents' tuition money. So her answer? What any reasonable 22-year-old would do, she phoned in a bomb threat. Police say Danielle Shea, seen there, never attended classes this past year at Quinnipiac College and University in Connecticut, even though her parents spent thousands of dollars for those classes. When graduation arrived, Shea panicked because she wasn't graduating. So she allegedly made 2 calls to the university's public safety department claiming there was a bomb in the library, and Shea urged campus police to evacuate the graduation area. Shea was quickly arrested at the university's athletic arena where graduation had been moved to. She is now charged with phoning in that bomb scare and is being held on $20,000 bond, which probably is the only thing keeping her safe from her mom. And so Danielle Shea is our favorite person of the day. Next, opening the book on guerrilla marketing for authors. You're watching Arise Exchange.
Mainstream news has covered all of the issues of the world, which are like this, through a very narrow lens. And at Arise News, we do things different. We cover every culture, every angle. Our mission is to go to these places, to these communities, whether they're in Africa, whether they're in Europe, Asia, the United States, the Caribbean. And we're going to find these stories, and we're going to tell them to our audience. stories that they probably never heard of before, and stories that they'll find interesting and engaging.
With fewer booksellers, more competition, and the rise of electronic books, there's more pressure than ever for writers to aggressively market their own work. And now many are finding creative ways to make their books stand out. With more on how authors are finding different ways to boost their book sales is Marva Allen, CEO of Human Bookstore and a frequent contributor here on Arise America, and you're joining us on Arise Xchange. Thank you so much. It used to be if you were an author, you really allowed and had the publishing company do all of the marketing for you. You sat at your typewriter in the old days, and you can't do that anymore, can you?
Absolutely not. Back in the old days, we had what we called a cottage publishing industry. That has radically changed. Most large publishers, of which there are 5 in the U.S., are on the stock exchange. This is a money-making endeavor right now. So it's very, very difficult for certain people to get books, contracts, and obviously you see this rise in self-publishing, the proliferation of that. And the reason that the publishing houses aren't doing that anymore is because everything is changing in the industry, and they used to spend thousands of dollars sending an author on tour. Now you'd be lucky to go.
Remember the old book tours?
Absolutely. The old book tours are a thing of the past.
And I know that a lot of people would buy books they would go in to buy one book into a Barnes & Noble, for example, see another book and buy it. Or they see someone reading a book on the subway, but now everyone's reading off their iPads with no book covers.
That's right. That's exactly right. And you know what? Somehow it's working well, because 50% of the book sales today are accounted for by electronic books. We're at that age right now where people at my age and maybe 40 and over, we want to have books. But the young kids who are growing up with computers,
and there's still books. There's still words on, if not a piece of paper, on a digital piece of paper.
Yes.
So what are some of the tactics that authors are doing to drum up sales? Some of it is pretty neat. John Shores, for example, who is known for his sort of travel fiction books, has taken people on tours.
I think that's fantastic. I would love to do that with my authors. I think it is so experiential. It's limited. You can only take 10 to 15 people, to manage something like that. But it is such a great thing to create a high-touch relationship with an author. I think it's fantastic, and I think we should do more of that. But authors are getting very creative, from, as I said, selling out of the trunk of their cars, to doing virtual bookstores on Skype. With all these book clubs, they're having to be in touch with their audiences a lot more to make their books a success.
Do you get pushback from the authors you speak with, though, who want to be creative in that they're authors, but are not marketers? They don't want to kind of get into the commercialization of their business.
Absolutely. Most great writers are exactly like that. Before too long, we never knew who a writer.
Could Ernest Hemingway have gone out and done this?
Absolutely not. Not unless you could catch him out there catching a fish, or something. But no, I think even today, many authors do not want to do that. It's not what they do. Their personality is internal. And to go out and publicize a book, you have to be almost an external person.
So what are some of the other sort of guerrilla marketing efforts that authors should be taking or are doing?
As I said, they're doing these international Skype tours. They're taking, going into these. In Jamaica, they have a lot of festivals, and they're taking this audience now, and going into the Caribbean.
So like what used to be a movie festival, like actual festivals to reach your specific audience.
Absolutely. They're doing a lot more of that, and they're doing it in various places in the world. They've gone to Ghana, they've gone to the Caribbean, and they're also talking to book clubs a lot more.
Is this, we have about a minute left, is this limited to fictionalized books, or do you see in the nonfiction world that there's got to be new marketing efforts as well?
Oh, there's definite. We're in a transition right now. There's going to be new efforts everywhere in both nonfiction and in fiction, and the publishers are still very much trying to figure that out. But I think the authors are ahead of them.
And once the authors get this, will there be a role for publishers anymore?
There has to be a role for publisher, and mostly for distribution, because even a self-published author, they find out when they've published the book, it's very difficult to get distribution, and the dies unless they sell it.
And are we seeing like book reviews now more focused on self-authors? Are they doing it? Like New York Times wouldn't review them for the longest time.
No.
They're just still in right now. But that's going to change, isn't it?
I don't know. You know, there's still sort of a snobbishness in the book industry, you know, and I mean, there's a lot of self-published work out there, but you know, some of it is really bad. So you'd have to be really careful what you select to support.
Okay. Marva Allen, thank you. We'll see you later on Arise America, I understand.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks for stopping by. That's Arise Exchange for this Tuesday. I'm Andrew Schmertz. Have a very good evening, everyone.